And with that being said, we will go ahead and begin today's webinar. Thank you all for completing the poll there. Appreciate you all for doing that. All right. So let's go ahead and get started here. All right. So hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar, Protecting Youth from Gangs on Social Media. My name is William Moore, and I'm with OJJDP's National Training and Technical Assistance Center. And as your technical host, I would like to take a couple of minutes to discuss a few features of the Adobe Connect webinar platform and provide a few announcements to keep in mind. Please note that today's webinar is brought to you by our colleagues at the National Gang Center. If you'd like to get in contact with the National Gang Center, their contact information is available on this slide. Also note that this event is being recorded and our webinar will be linked to our YouTube page. You can find past webinar events archived on Intact's YouTube page. You can click on the link here. And for any transcript or supporting materials, you can access them by contacting the OJJDP TTA Help Desk. Download a copy of important documents and resources related to today's webinar. You may do so by locating the Handouts pod directly above the chat area. Here, you will find the webinar PowerPoint and an FAQ for webinar participants that will likely address any technical related questions. Simply click on the name of the file and then click the download button. At the end of today's webinar, there will be a Q&A session where presenters will address some of the questions posed during the presentation. Please type your questions into the chat box as they arise. Now, if you all could, please help us count. If you're viewing in a group or with a group, please go to the chat window and type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today. If you're viewing by yourself, there's no need to type anything at this time. Again, only those who are viewing in a group, please type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today. If you're viewing alone, there's no need to type anything at this time. And I'll give folks just a couple more seconds to do that. Just type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today. If you're viewing by yourself, no need to type anything at this time. Following today's webinar, attendees will receive a certificate of attendance. Please note that when you're signed in through Adobe Connect, you will receive an automated feedback email with the certificate of attendance. However, attendees that are joining as a group, you should download in conjunction with the signed-in attendee sheet to the group validation form from the Handouts pod. You will complete it and send it to the website here if you would like to receive your certificate if you're joined as a group. Again, if you're joined and you're signed in, you will automatically receive your certificate. For those additional people in the room with you, they will need to provide their information on the validation form so that we can get them a certificate, only for those additional people. And then after today's webinar, please note that we will have an online evaluation where we would appreciate individuals to please provide your feedback for today's webinar and today's presentation. So that being said, I'd like to turn it over to our moderator, Steffi Rapp, to take us away. Thank you, Steffi.
Thank you, William. Again, my name is Steffi Rapp with the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention within the Special Victims and Violent Offenders Division. On behalf of OJJDP, I would like to welcome you all and thank you for taking time out of your schedules to join us for today's discussion on the intersection of gangs and social media. The Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention is a component of the Office of Justice Programs within the U.S. Department of Justice. OJP's program offices include the Bureau of Justice Assistance, the Bureau of Justice Statistics, the National Institute of Justice, the Office for Victims of Crime, OJJDP, and the Office of Sex Offender Sentencing, Monitoring, Apprehending, Registering, and Tracking. At OJJDP, we envision a nation where our children are free from crime and violence, and if they come into contact with the justice system, the contact should be both just and beneficial to them. By supporting states, local communities, and tribal jurisdictions in your efforts to develop and implement effective programs for juveniles, our office strives to strengthen the juvenile justice system's efforts to protect public safety, hold offenders accountable, and provide services that address the needs of youth and their families. OJJDP funds a suite of gang programs to include the Youth Gang Intervention Diversion Program to change community members' attitudes regarding violence, provide youth with alternatives to gang membership, and educate them about the risks of gang involvement. The Youth Gang Suppression Program to help communities gather and share data about their gang problems so they can develop effective responses to and sustain reductions in youth violence. The Supporting Victims of Gang Violence Program to help service providers identify, treat, and seek justice for victims. And this year, we're funding a solicitation on comprehensive anti-gang programs for youth. With funding support from OJJDP, the National Gang Center, managed by the Institute for Intergovernmental Research, has provided national leadership, coordination, and resources to help communities prevent and respond to gang violence. I thank the great staff at the National Gang Center, especially Mina Harris, for their dedication in preparing today's webinar. Today's webinar will focus on how gangs are using social media to recruit youth and carry out illegal activity, how you can better identify threats and protect youth from gang recruitment and victimization, and also it will provide resources for your social media safety programming. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce today's panel of subject matter experts. Their full bios are also located in the handout section of this webinar. Retired Chief of Police Sean Baldwin is a Senior Research Associate with the Institute for Intergovernmental Research's Youth and Community Justice Programs Group and supports the National Gang Center with law enforcement, anti-gang training, and technical assistance. Mr. Baldwin served 25 years as a law enforcement officer in Fort Pierce, Florida, serving his last 9 years as Chief of Police. Mr. Baldwin holds a master's degree in Criminal Justice Administration from Lynn University. Heather Mundell is a sergeant at the Polk County Sheriff's Office in Winter Haven, Florida. She's a 19-year veteran and was assigned to the Homeland Security Intelligence Section from 2005 to 2016. During that time, she assisted in more than 20 online operations, tracked suspects using social media, and provided reviews of new mobile applications to determine their usefulness to law enforcement. In 2016, she was promoted to sergeant and has supervised the intelligence section, which encompassed detectives with the FBI Safe Streets Task Force and patrol operations. Sergeant Mundell holds a Bachelor's of Science degree in Business Administration from Barry University. I will now turn it over to these two great experts.
Awesome. Thank you, Steffi. So again, my name is Sean Baldwin, and I work with the National Gang Center. And on behalf of the Gang Center, I want to welcome you. It's awesome to see so many people that are online with us here today that have an interest in protecting our youth from gangs on social media. Before we get into the actual specific aspects of social media, we thought it might be a good idea to do a brief introduction to gangs and provide some awareness so that participants that aren't necessarily gang experts have some basic understanding on this issue. So if you'll allow me, I'm going to move on and do that now. So the first question is, what is a gang? And I want to start by saying what a gang isn't. A gang isn't just a group of kids or youth that are hanging out together. What you have on the screen there is a federal definition. Almost every state in the nation now has statutes regarding gangs and gang recruiting, and most include a definition of what a gang is. There's some general commonalities across the states, but we ask that you please check your local statutes and regulations, especially if you're doing legal work in this area. But just generally speaking, what you'll see is a gang is a group that has 3 or more members. And when we talk about U Street gangs, generally the ages are 12 to 24. The members share an identity, typically linked to a gang name or common symbols. There's an element of fear, of intimidation that comes along with that, and that impacts communities greatly. The members normally view themselves as a gang. They'll call themselves by a gang name, and they're recognized by other gangs and community members as being a gang. And really critical point in this definition is that the group exists to commit criminal activity. So normally we see a higher level of criminal activity around gangs, and oftentimes that includes violent crime. So that's sort of a general description of what a gang is. So let's talk a little bit about the impact of gangs. So we know from studies that we have done over the last decade that we have more than 33,000 gangs in the United States, 1.4 million gang members, and we know that the crimes that they're involved in include the traditional crimes are drugs, robbery, theft, those sorts of things. But we also know that gangs here lately are involved in some emerging crimes, and those crimes include human trafficking, fraud, and identity theft. And we'll talk about how gangs are using social media to advance those crimes as we go through the presentation. Of course, the other impact of gangs is violent crime. In 2011, there was a study called the National Gang Threat Assessment, and agencies from across the nation submitted responses to this survey. And what we found was that about 48% of violent crime, on average, for those jurisdictions that responded, were committed by gangs or related to gang activity. That is an awful lot of violent crime that's being committed by gangs around our nation. Some jurisdictions reported that as much as 90% of their violent crime came from gangs. And the thing that's tough to measure but easy to feel if you're a community member or you work in one of these communities is the fear and intimidation that gangs impose on a community. It can actually cripple a community, and I've seen that firsthand. So that's an important impact. I want to talk a little bit about some of the indicators of gang crime so that you know what to look for. So sort of on the left-hand side there, that National Gang Center, those are some of the common names that you are probably more popular across the nation for gang names. Blood, Crips, 18th Street, Vice Lords, Folk Nation, People Nation, and those differ depending on where you're at in the country, and unfortunately there's hundreds more names that go along with that. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the local gangs and what you see. Of course, you'll hear Bloods and Crips. You may hear, for instance, I'm from Fort Pierce, the city of the Fort Pierce Bloods or the Lincoln Park Bloods, or they'll put something in front of Bloods, Crips, or one of the more nationally recognized gangs. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're directly associated with those national organizations, but some of them do like the notoriety of using those names. The other thing that we'll see that's very common is they'll use the name of a street. So they'll call themselves the 10th Street or the Green Street Gang. We also see West Side or East Side, North Side Boys, and then you could replace that with Thugs, Gang, Mob, Nation, and Family. But don't think that these are the only way the gangs name themselves. We just got back from doing some training in Las Vegas a couple of months ago, and we heard that some of their gangs were naming themselves after parks or school districts and using the, instead of calling themselves a gang, they're calling themselves a movement. But they're definitely meeting the definition of gang in terms of their criminal activity. So that's what you may see in terms of gang names. I want to talk about some of the signs and symbols and graffiti that gangs use. So gangs use graffiti to mark their territory. They'll use it to brag about their reputation or mourn fallen friends and even threaten or challenge other rival gangs. In many ways, this graffiti precedes or is the social media of the streets. So youth are engaging in graffiti may have spray paint, white tip markers, sketchbooks, and so forth in their possession. They may also have paint on their clothing or backpacks from overspray. But I want to warn you that there are some individuals that exist, we call them graffiti artists or taggers, that have nothing to do with gangs, but still use graffiti. So don't just make sure that you're not confusing that just because somebody's doing graffiti, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're a gang members. So in terms of symbols and numbers and marks, they have really special significance in the gang culture. Some of the more common symbols, you'll see some of those on your screen there, include stars, either 5 or 6 pointed stars, depending on the name, crowns, pitchforks, either pointing up or pointing down, 3 dots and a triangle, or 4 dots. Sometimes numbers like the number 18 for the 18th Street Gang is significant. So if you're working with youth or you're a teacher, you may actually see these signs and symbols on notebooks, for instance. You'll see a couple of examples on the screen there of what, if you could see the whole thing, you'd recognize that as a gang Bible that actually has their secret codes, their rules, their anthems, and so forth that are written down, their secret codes that they use. Some gangs have different symbols that they use to communicate. So you can find those in those things. So if you see those sorts of things in your classroom or in your child's backpack, that's definitely something that can cause some concern. So the other thing is the signs or signals. So almost all gangs have a special hand sign or signal. Sometimes they'll actually spell out their gang name, like the Bloods or the Crips, or they'll have some other type of hand signal that they'll use. So you'll see all of this on social media posts as they're representing their affiliation, which is a big reason for a lot of the posts. So if you're seeing these signs and symbols, some of it's very local, so I can't say that a star necessarily means this on one side of the country and the same thing on the other side of the country. Our advice is always that you contact local law enforcement. Most that are working in communities that have gangs have gang units or gang analysts, and school resources officers are a great resource to get specific help of analyzing what these signs may mean. So some other indicators are colors in clothing. Colors are really meaningful to gangs. Gang members will dress in a specific way to identify themselves and identify their gang or their set or their clique, or sometimes called a crew. Could include bandanas that are worn. I think people have seen those. Certain colors that wear all red, they'll stay away from other colors. And sports jerseys are pretty common in some jurisdictions, either for a particular number or a particular color in terms of representing. But again, just because somebody's wearing a color doesn't necessarily mean that they're a gang member. I would be concerned with youth when they start wearing only one particular color. They avoid other colors completely, and their dress is coupled with other indicators that we've shared here. I would be concerned if I saw a child that was wearing the same color in every social media post that they're posting, because what they're doing there is representing most likely. So tattoos also are particularly important to gangs. You'll see all those same signs and symbols, abbreviations for gang names, and we've actually seen paintings, if you will, tattooed on gang members that actually represent crime scene sketches and crimes or murders that they have committed. It's very difficult to interpret those types of tattoos, but look for those. The easy things are the crowns, the diamonds, the pitchforks, and then of course the initials, like you'll see one there says MS-13, which is obviously a dangerous gang that we'd watch out for. So before we get to Sergeant Mendel, who's our expert in social media, I sort of wanted to give you an overview and just look at some of the research and broader picture of how gangs are using social media. So we know that gangs are highly active on social media. At one point, there was sort of a myth that maybe gangs weren't so active, they weren't sophisticated enough, or they didn't have access to the technology, and that certainly just isn't true. Some more recent research is showing us that about 82% of gang members use the internet, about 71% are active on social media. About 20% actually admitted in one study that their gang actually operates a website or a specific social media page. That's about 5 years ago. I think that number would go up now if we did the same survey. What I want to stress to you here is those numbers are about the same as everyday, non-gang members. So we see, and particularly with youth, we see about the same involvement in internet and social media use as we do with non-gang members. So that myth that I talked about in the beginning there is completely untrue. So the other thing that we've watched is what platforms that gangs are using on social media. Now this goes back to 2015, and I think Sergeant Mandela is going to tell you that all of this now is changing, sometimes weekly, depending on the newest and the latest and the greatest platform. But you can get an idea here that in 2015, Facebook was the #1 platform, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, Google, Flickr. Of course, there's some that didn't exist back then that you won't see on this. But the point is that gangs are definitely using every platform that's available to them. So I want to talk about how gangs use social media, just sort of in general, and then we'll give you some specific examples as we go through the rest of the presentation. So gangs will use social media to recruit members. They'll use it to communicate with one another, to target rivals, and to carry out crime, and then to thwart law enforcement, with their secret codes and so forth that they think that we can't figure out. So let's talk a little bit about recruiting gang members. So there's two types of recruiting that will go on social media. One is direct recruiting, where we'll see a direct message where somebody is actually asking a non-gang member to join their gang, or the other way around, a non-gang member is asking if they can join a gang. We've actually seen text messages where gang members say, give me $150 and I'll bring you up under me and you can be a legit whatever gang member. But I want you to know that most of the recruiting is probably not that direct. What I'm saying is you're probably not going to see posted on Facebook or Instagram a members wanted ad for gangs, because most gang members know that recruiting is a crime. In some jurisdictions it's a felony to recruit, and it's very visible when they're recruiting that way. So they know that we can see that. Most of the recruiting is more indirect. So you'll see the gang videos, the posts, the pictures, the text messaging is all about glorifying the gang life. And what that does is it attracts vulnerable youth to that lifestyle. And that's the most effective recruiting method that gangs have for sure. So, and again, when you see the videos from the gang members that are flashing their signs, their colors, they're glorifying the gang life with all the money. They'll commonly flash large sums of money, sex, drugs, and this sort of sense of family or security that vulnerable youth are looking for, and that's the attraction. So when we talk about committing crime, we see on a weekly basis how gangs are using social media to commit crimes. They'll target rivals, they'll boast about their crimes, they'll try to hide communication from law enforcement, and even more recently now, as we're learning more and more about how gangs are involved in human trafficking, sex trafficking, they're using it to lure victims. The reward poster that's posted on here is Nisa Mickens and Kayla Kruved. They actually got into a beef with MS-13, and both were killed, tragically killed, because of a beef that they had and a post that they made online calling out the MS-13 gang. So you can see how dangerous this actually is in real life. So let me talk just a second about recruiting sex trafficking victims. We know that gangs are directly involved in sex trafficking, and they're involved because they're motivated by very high profits, and they have a perception that it's lower risk. In other words, it's lower risk than standing out on the corner and selling drugs in an open air type of drug market or peddling guns and that kind of stuff. I think they have the impression that maybe the police are paying more attention to that type of activity and not as much attention to the sex trafficking, which makes it lower risk for them. So gangs are actively using social media to recruit sex traffic victims, and we know from some studies that have done on this topic specifically that the average age is 14 to 15 years old. Most of the victims are girls. They can be boys, though, and we've seen victims as young as 8 years old. So the social media and gangs, the big threat with media and committing crimes also includes sex trafficking. We want to make sure that's clear, that you're paying attention to, especially with the young ladies that may be involved. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our social media expert, Heather Mundell, who actually teaches a class for us on this topic to law enforcement officers all over the nation, and she is the person that we call when we need help. So Heather, if you'd take it away.
All right, good afternoon, and happy National Social Media Day. I think this is a great day to actually go over this topic involving social media, since today is National Social Media Day. The first platform that I want to go into with you guys is to talk about Facebook. And back in 2015, this was considered the largest social media platform with 2.6 billion monthly users, and ranked, number one for the platform used by gang members. We've seen a big shift in that, as a lot of gang members may call Facebook Fedbook. They believe law enforcement and specifically federal agents use Facebook to monitor their activity. So it's really become, in the past couple of years, a gateway marketing tool that redirects a lot of social media users to other secure chat platforms that they can, talk with, and we'll go over some of those platforms today. There still is a presence on Facebook, as we've all seen with our at-risk youth or our kids, even with gang members. One nationally recognized gang that we've discussed today, the Bloods, have a page with almost 14,000 people following them. In their About Me section, they have a description of themselves as a street gang founded in 1972 in Los Angeles, California, and they list their rivalry with the Crips, and they even have a telephone number available for anyone to call. So this is definitely an example of our brazen gang members having a social media presence even in today. I know one of y'all have mentioned a lot of our different questions involving gang members and their usernames on Facebook, and many of them, like Sean said, will have similar names like Montana Gang or Montana, different names going with Montana or whatever their gang name is, and they'll often switch it up. They also do use like all the same place for their work employment. One of y'all mentioned the Krusty Krab, but it also can be stores, high-end stores that they'll all use in their usernames, and they commonly change this in the different platforms kind of to go with whatever changes they've made within their gang. Facebook is, with their live stream, gang members have used Facebook and Facebook Live to recruit and boast about criminal activity, often horrific violence. In 2017, Chicago police reported that Facebook Live was used to stream the gang rape of a 15-year-old girl, and 40 people watched the live stream without reporting it to law enforcement. Also around that time in Yonkers, investigators found that gang members were using Facebook Live to brag about slashing rivals, proclaiming territory. They were even posting a video warning fellow gang members to stay off Facebook because it could be used as evidence. And the gang was using private messaging and Messenger to recruit for recruiting purpose and scolding other members, as well as chastising victims for running away and sending locations of victims to possibly shoot at. So definitely within the past 3 years, still showing examples of how gang members are using Facebook across social media to include Facebook. One tool that may be valuable to you for parents, educators, or law enforcement to monitor some social media activity from your at-risk youth or one of your children are Social Searcher. I have one here, PictureMate, and one thing I want to bring up is some of these open source tools that I'm going to go over today, they may be free and open source, but keep in mind that tomorrow they could be non-functioning or bought out from another company or just no longer free in the future. And PictureMate's an example of an extension that you can use on Google Chrome that, you know, within the time that we worked on this project, it's no longer valid. So another source would be ImageEye, another good source for downloading pictures off of someone's Facebook page if you needed that for whatever reason. You were tracking an at-risk youth or a possible victim being exploited for human trafficking, would be to download ImageEye Chrome extension, and this could be very helpful to you in whatever investigation you have. Keep in mind the tools I will be going over, they are free, but always remember, just as a note, that malicious actors can misappropriate correct sites with links and other files that should never be clicked. So just be aware of what you click on, and keep in mind that Social Searcher, the other tool I'm providing here, is basically a real-time search engine that you could use for as an educator, Leo, or social worker, in which you can search by a word, a username, or even a current trend word such as CRIP, which we've mentioned several times today, and it will give you different search results, most always things that are posted on public. You're not usually ever able to see anything someone may have posted on private. So this Social Searcher not only searches Facebook, but also Instagram, LinkedIn, Vimeo, YouTube, and Reddit. So a lot of different tools there that for your disposal. So another really popular social media platform, and this is an American online video sharing platform, would be YouTube. And again, in 2015, this was ranked #2 most used by gang members. And it also is a site that's #2 across the nation as the second #2 site in the country that viewers go online, not just gang members, but everybody in the country, with Facebook being #4. So still relevant social media platforms, even though it's 5 years later. Gang videos are very popular. Gang fights, beat-ins, rap music, these are still very common that we see today. And we're also seeing them on all these other video social media platforms that we'll be discussing that are more current. But we can't rule out YouTube being #2. Gang-related videos can receive millions of views, and the one you see here today has close to 5.7 million views, so still very relevant, even though it was posted several years ago. Just to give you an idea, just this month and probably 2 weeks ago, Boston made close to 30 arrests, and many of them prominent rappers in their community and members of the Knob gang, and they were charged with kidnapping, bank fraud, murder, drug trafficking, as well as forcing women into human trafficking and dragging them across state lines. They were very prominent in their areas for their YouTube rap videos, which they used to brag about committing shootings, murders, threaten law enforcement, and other crimes. In one video, they actually threatened to shoot the rival gang, and they filmed the video in the rival's turf just to disrespect them. They also simulated executing a rival gang member and lit their clothing on fire. So some of these gang members committed these brazen crimes while wearing ankle bracelets for state charges they had just got out on. So they have just been recently charged federally. Approximately 25 guns were recovered, and they glamorized shooting at police, and they even at the end of their videos provided their Instagram handles so that people after watching the videos could then go on Instagram and follow them. They had close to 200,000 views on the video they just posted in April. To give you an idea, it's not something that occurred, back in 2015 or 2009. It's still occurring today, and gang members obviously are still using this platform to do so. YouTube can basically be looked at has a library for gang-related videos in some situations. These videos are used to definitely boast about gang life and can be used as effective recruiting campaigns for at-risk youth, and we all need to keep that in mind. Blood Walk has 6.2 million views, and these other Blood vs. Crip rappers and Crip vs. Blood fights are still, climbing in use. So the goal for many of youth today is to go viral, whether it be on YouTube, whether it be on TikTok, Instagram, or IG, Snapchat. They want to go viral, and the more views they can get, the better. And these platforms are important for that. And it's also important to make sure that you're following the prominent gang members and their rap videos in your local community, as it tends to give you an idea of the current trends involving, they may join a hybrid gang, or they could be warning of inciting violence with their rivals. They may change colors from, say, black to yellow. So it's a good idea to keep to follow the local rappers in your area within the videos, maybe warnings that, in some of the videos you'll see they'll actually put a warning that says the firearms used in this video are props only, but when you watch the video they do not appear to be props, but a lot of times they do that so as to deter any possible law enforcement action. So youth can also find tutorial videos for games like Grand Theft Auto. These are still popular games for youth today that can simulate gang life, and there's instructional videos still on this platform that shows how to engage in gang war, recruit gang members, and also lead a gang. And still very popular with close to 1.5 million views on the Bloods versus Crips war. Some online tools that may be helpful when downloading a video. So say that you want to download it, you have an at-risk youth and he's involved in a video that maybe you want to download. These are tools that if you copy the link within YouTube and paste it into these free open source sites, it'll allow you to download it. Keep in mind if there's some restriction copyright laws for if it's a popular mainstream artist and you may be trying to copy and download that. It's not really created for that. But most of your local gang members posting on videos do not have copyright restrictions. So those are available in case you think they may take it down and they're simulating a crime, or there may be evidence in the YouTube video. Also, there's also on YouTube, there's in the settings of the video, you can choose to turn on the subtitles, and that will auto-generate English lyrics for you, or whatever language you have, and that might help you see what they're saying while they're doing the rap video. Keep in mind, because it's auto-generated, you may need a human to review it for correction, but it kind of gives you an idea of what is being said during the video and could be helpful. Another social media platform, this is more of a photo sharing network. To give you some stats, it's the third most used by gang members in 2015, and I would dare to say it's still very, very popular with youth. This is dubbed more engaging than Snapchat and Facebook, and has 1 billion monthly active users. If you have an at-risk youth or a person that you're tracking, even your child, keep in mind that many of those photos or videos that they post, even stories, have the capability of being saved in their album section on their phone. So even if it does disappear or get deleted, there's the possibility when they downloaded it that they allowed some of the pictures to be saved in their albums, so that if you ever need it, you may want to review that for any possible exploitation or any possible criminal activities. Homicides and shootings have been linked in the U.S. and beyond to single Instagram posts where money was flashed or other coveted items by gang members. That's been increasing. Stories are very popular, not just with Instagram, but they're also very popular with Facebook. Who owns Instagram? And you've been seeing at the top of several of these social media platforms, these circles, and they have red at the top. And what happens is many people will post real-time photos, Not always. You can upload an old one or an old video, but most people are posting real-time photos in those stories, and then they disappear within 12 hours. Unless that person decides to save that story as a highlight, it will disappear after 24 hours. So it's important that if you have a gang that you may be tracking, check their story. A lot of people have looked in their posts and said, I didn't see anything. I didn't see any shootings on there, and they didn't realize that you had to actually go to the story and see some of the criminal content there. This is becoming super popular with most social networking sites. Instagram also has IGTV or Instagram TV, which is a standalone app for iPhone, iOS, and Android. Most of the time, if your video is less than 60 seconds, it can go right onto Instagram, which you can view. But if it's longer than that, this is becoming more of a YouTube substitute in a competition for TikTok. But if it's longer than 60 seconds and can go up to 10 minutes, it will usually go to the IGTV standalone app. And these are getting more and more popular that we're seeing kids are using today, youth are using today. In 2017, Detroit police found where there was actually a hit list on Instagram where there was a potential of 10 targets. 7 of those targets listed were shot and 4 were killed. Also, the next year following that, and this kind of depicts exploitation in the fashion industry, but you had an Instagram star and a Colombian model who was arrested for running an international gang-involved sex trafficking ring where 250 to 400 underage girls from poor neighborhoods and broken homes were being targeted and told they could be possibly become models, and they were then became victims of human trafficking, tattooed and branded. So in this case, you have a social media, you have a Instagram star using her social media presence as a marketing tool and then exploiting youth because of that. Definitely something we want to be aware of within the fashion industry and beyond for this type of activity. Some tips for Instagram, and this also goes for Facebook too, and this is really important if you're tracking on an at-risk youth or you have maybe a missing child that you think is maybe running with a gang on the weekends or what have you. If you see a green dot next to their name, many times that means they are online. And of course, someone else could have their phone. But keep in mind, if you believe they're a victim of exploitation or they want to hurt themselves, there is the possibility that law enforcement could then request a subpoena for a quick location if we believe the juvenile is at risk. And most all social media platforms assist law enforcement with child exploitation, human trafficking, and that type of thing. Also, you're able to, if you have a certain youth you're risk, or even your child that you're trying to keep track of, there's a way that you can turn on their post notifications and story notifications so that anytime they post, it sends you a notification, or the notification sits there when you open your Instagram. So you can kind of keep track of them and make sure that they're okay and that they're staying safe. Some free tools. Here's another example of what I was telling you where open source tools or free open source tools change often. It was GramUser. That was, it is now called GramFind, F-I-N-D. But with this tool, it's actually an Instagram search engine. And if you were to put a username of an Instagram username there, you could find, if it's on public, their top hashtags, their top user tags, their most liked photo, and their most commented photo. And why top hashtags would be important is maybe they're using some different hashtags for gang use or maybe other members, and so you can do a little bit more in-depth detailed research on that gang. So keep in mind it's no longer GramUser, but it's GramFind, and that's changed again within this, working on this project. IG stories for Instagram and these other tools on the left-hand side are more Chrome extensions that you can download off Google. They're also free, and they just assist you if you're trying to do a lot of this on the desktop versus on your phone. This makes it easier to view, download, and kind of look at the different photos from a desktop or a laptop versus a cell phone. Also, if you have a Facebook matched with Instagram, if your target or if your at-risk youth does decide to go on Instagram and they may have a complete different name than Facebook, it will notify you potentially that, hey, your friend on Facebook, their username is this, and they just joined Instagram. And that might be helpful because they may also use that same username for Discord or Twitch or Snapchat or other platforms, Yubo, and it kind of gives you an idea of where you may find them online if you're trying to keep them safe. Believe it or not, Twitter has been around for a very long time, and it's still pretty relevant. In the past couple months, it's really improved in its use, to track news and different ways that people have been using it. But in 2015, it was the fourth most used by gang members, and known for its tweets. They actually brought hashtags to the map. So we all use hashtags a lot due to Twitter, and you can also attach photos and short videos. They are a microblogging and social network service and still pretty popular. In a study of a murdered female gang leader, once they went through a lot of the tweets of the investigation, they found that gangs are using Twitter to threaten and taunt rivals, to include the police. They also use it to posture and campaign for respect, to carry out violence, and then to mark presence in their territory. So still a relevant site for gang members that we don't want to rule out, and that we kind of want to have an idea of its use. And there are also a few examples of Twitter being used in feuds, threats, and ultimately violence. Was in New York, gangs were using Twitter to trash talk each other and plan fights as far back dating to 2009. And in Chicago, rappers and gang members were feuding on Twitter right before one of them was shot and killed. So still a site to keep in mind. A good tool to use for Twitter, one of them could be UseRx. This is an internet search on a topic or a person using the site. You can also search LinkedIn and MySpace and Instagram, but that tool on the left is still a working tool. And then on the right, you have the capability. We'll just continue to use the word Crip. But if you wanted to search for users on Twitter talking about Crips or Bloods, and then you could put your location near this place. It could be Milwaukee or Tampa or New York City, Las Vegas, and then you do a quick search. That's all done within Twitter, and you'll kind of get a taste of what the community, your community, is talking about, what relevant content is being said about Bloods and Crips. Could be news, and maybe it's different posts or YouTube accounts that are tagged or flagged with those hashtags. But it's a good way to keep an eye on your thumb on the pulse of what's being talked about with those things. There's other Twitter tools that there's plenty of them out there that allow for analytics to be done, spatialization to show all the different friends they talk to on Twitter, how often they talk to them, and the most used hashtags. There's also Excel spreadsheets, an open source tool that will put all their friends in a nice Excel spreadsheet out for you, so you can kind of keep track of who all they're talking to and look to see if you're seeing a theme gang name between all their friends. And that there's lots of open tools that are available for Twitter. Snapchat is really, really popular, more of a newer site for gang members. It's not really listed so much as the top 5, but I think now it probably is used more than what we may think so. But Snapchat allows users to share their photos and videos, and to Snapchat, their idea was that posts should be temporary and disappear, and kind of like a daily diary written in disappearing ink. That's kind of what the idea of Snapchat is. And so most of the time when you post a picture on Snapchat, you can choose from 1 to 10 seconds. Once the user looks at it, it disappears, and it appears more secure to people. If you were to screenshot Snapchat, it would notify the user that you screenshotted. Same thing goes for stories, and Snapchat kind of brought stories to the map, that if you do look at someone's story, that person can see that you looked at their story. That goes for Facebook and Instagram as well. It just always shows that you looked at their story and who looks and who doesn't. So definitely things to keep in mind if you were, say, doing an investigation, or you may not want the person to know that you saw, but just to know that that's out there. There's 210 million active users in 2019 on Snapchat. Believe it or not, there's a thing called Snap Score that is kind of relevant, and what it is, and Snapchat doesn't give us all the ideas of where it comes from. You get a point for this and a point for that, but it's basically how many snaps you receive and send. And many times you'll have someone, to give you an example, I've been on since 2013, and my score is about 45,000. And that's many years, and that's sending and receiving, and I'm not that active. However, if you have someone who is claiming they're not very active on Snapchat, but when you go to their settings, you can see where they have 450,000 as a score. It shows their activity level of how often they're going on Snap and sending and receiving. They're also sometimes not on mine because I haven't provided my date of birth, but they also provide an astrological sign, which if you're trying to get a possible date of birth or around that time, that could be helpful to you. The emojis on the right within Snapchat text are very important too, because if you're trying to see who the #1 person is that your user is talking to, it will always be with a heart. That is the #1 person they talk to, and that could be important if you're investigating some type of case, or if you're trying to track your at-risk youth, either recruiting a gang member or maybe possibly even a human trafficker. The emojis with the glasses in Snapchat means it's the people they communicate with, possibly the second most other than the heart. And then if you have an emoji with a grimacing face, that means that the person you're talking to and the person they're talking to are both the #1 people they're talking to, which could indicate some kind of issue or rival in the future. So just to kind of keep an idea, and the definitions for these emojis will be on the PowerPoint for your perusal. Snapchat streaks, you may have heard of these too. You'll see the one 730 at the top. That means that for 730 straight days, that person has communicated with another, either sending a photo or a video, and the other person has sent them a photo or a video 730 straight days. If you miss a single day, you lose your entire streak. Lose the streak, lose the friend, and it's still very popular with youth of keeping that streak up. Even many times if they go on vacation where there's no phone use or whatever, they will have a friend log into their account on Snapchat and send a picture for them so they do not lose their streak. That's very important to some youth. There's also the capability for geo-groups and within Snapchat, so that you can post a geographical post, say within a mall, to try to attract potential human trafficking victims. You can also do a custom story where only some people can see it, or you can just do a private story where instead of posting your story where everybody on your Snapchat account can see it, it just goes to a certain amount of people or within a certain geographical area. Snap Maps were introduced in 2017. In fact, within the last 2 weeks, they've rolled out the new Happening Now feature, which Snap Maps are a little easier to find on Snapchat, but if someone posts something publicly, you can see snaps from around the world. You can go onto a desktop and just type in Snap Map and it will take you there, or you could look at it within the app. And again, you'll only be able to see posts people allow publicly for people to view, but we have viewed people selling, using narcotics, showing firearms, that type of thing, and they were located on Snap Maps. And I know our agency's actually done search warrants and recovered stolen firearms and a large amount of narcotics and cash from people just showcasing themselves open source on a Snap Map. If you do download the app and you do go into the map section, it's going to ask how you want your locations to be seen. Make sure you go into ghost mode, allowing no one to see your location. However, I know last week we actually used Snap Maps to find a missing endangered girl who had been run away, and we thought she was being exploited. And so we had a friend look up her location, had her as a friend on Snapchat, looked on Snap Maps, and she just happened to have her location turned on. She didn't realize she needed that in ghost mode, and we were able to recover her just last week. So still a valuable tool to keep in mind that you can use. The stories, when people post stories, if this can be gang members or at-risk youth even, that they can include links to their social media accounts. They can tag friends. You can check in a location, sort of like Facebook used to. That also goes for Instagram as well. Also, people have used one Snapchat account to send people to a second one, or they've used these shout-out accounts where they have a rival person and they ask everybody to send nefarious or inappropriate content, pictures, or just to harass someone, and they provide a handle of Snapchat, and so everybody goes and sends them photos, and then that victim has no idea where they got 30,000 pictures coming from. Just some tips is be careful and realize that when you take a screenshot, you see at the top where it shows Orlando Magician, that person's being indicated that they were screenshotted, and you can usually see which user screenshotted you. Also keep in mind that Snapchat users do have the option to keep their photos in their album section. Some of them save them, or some of them choose to lock them down to where only they can see them within their account. It's a lot of options that Snapchat users make, and each person could be different. In a recent case, we found where a gang member was actually posting photos and videos of possible runaways, juvenile runaways, and he would say that he had new girls, and he would post this on his Facebook page, and he would ask people to log in on live stream later that night to see the new girls and within the attempt to pimp them out. Once they would go on live stream, he would kind of give like a sort of a quick view of the girl, and then encourage everybody to go to Snapchat, because he knew if he did any nudity on Facebook live stream, they monitor it and would take it down. So he would then use Facebook to point them all to another Snapchat account, which is then where he would go and advertise the girl. So many times Facebook is still being used as a pointer tool to these other social media sites. TikTok is something that we have definitely used a lot of since January. It's increased 1.65 billion downloads in January, which is really amazing since it's been around for a little bit. There's a new family lock feature that does allow parents to control some of the content. It's highly based on algorithm. The concern too would be that exploiters can view minors' videos, comment, message them, reply to them, and they can even download the kids' video right to their phone if, when they upload it, they allow users to download. So that would definitely be a concern. And then, as with anything else, traffickers could recruit on this platform like we've seen them do on almost all the other ones. Definitely been seen on TikTok gang signs and symbols where there's a marketing opportunity. You'll see gang members will go to that and look for different at-risk youth to target, to recruit, and also to commit viral crimes and see if they can get lots of views. The point of TikTok is definitely to go viral and to get as many views as possible. So you won't always, as a gang member, want to have your profile locked down. You want lots of views. This tool is an open source tool that's like a TikTok web viewer, and you can browse users, you can follow hashtags, stats, and it has a lot of other things that, you know, may be a good tool for you to use. House Party, as we've seen with Zoom and so many other applications that have just in the past couple months just shot to the top, is these are video chats, super popular with adults and youth alike, where they're notified when the person comes in, and it's like a house party online. Keep in mind that all these platforms platforms can be used for nefarious purposes to harm children, to exploit children for human trafficking purposes. So even though the name says House Party, it sounds like a fun app, we all know that it can be used for nefarious purposes as well. WhatsApp is a more encrypted and secure platform. After you send a message, it disappears. A lot of people feel more comfortable with using this application instead of a text message where it would stay in your phone, whereas this would be not only encrypted end to end, but has the possibility of disappearing. Another great feature, which gang members would want to use it, is you can contact people or call all across the world. So if you have contacts in these other countries, or you're moving people or what have you, this is something that most law enforcement, they would believe, would not be able to monitor, and they would feel a lot more comfortable using this platform to do so. Gaming apps still really popular. We've seen robberies from gaming apps where people are on Twitch live streaming, Steam, Discord, playing Call of Duty or whatever multiplayer game, and they may post an item for sale or speak of an item for sale. We've seen different robberies. We've seen children exploited on these accounts. You are able to DM or direct message while playing these games and talk live. So we have seen across the country where definitely gang members, and I can also say for myself, while playing Call of Duty, I have heard over the years recruiting on some of these Call of Duty and different PlayStation sites asking for members if they want to join their gangs. When you log into a lot of these gaming systems, they're looking for users nearby, which you may very well be talking to members that are recruiting within a very close proximity of where you're at. Mobile payment apps and platforms and devices, many times that some gang members also for human trafficking may feel more comfortable using these types of apps of Venmo, PayPal, Cash Apps, and Zelle, or even Snapcash, stuff like that, which I don't know if that's being used anymore, but it was for a while. Definitely Google Cash and Apple Pay. But they may use these accounts to pay for some of their services that they have, or for data breaches that they get off data breaches to commit fraud, or to pay for other nefarious activities. So be aware that sometimes they open these frivolous businesses just to obtain like the Square, and then they can swipe it for purposes that can be used for sexual exploitation and the like. Believe it or not, online auctions and classified sites are still relevant. That people are still using ad websites, Letgo, Craigslist, to sell their items. Many people will go on there to sell like dogs and cats, but there's also tons of robberies that we've seen across the country that turn into homicides, shootings, and gang members have targeted people selling a large amount of tennis shoes or what have you, an item that's maybe hard to find, and then set them up for a robbery, homicide. And those continue to be issues that law enforcement respond to, or some of your kids could get caught up in, so you want to make sure that you warn them about that. Even though Backpage is gone, if you go to the website, it's been shut down. Keep in mind that there's still several websites that are very similar that are being used across the country to traffic, that can be used by gangs to traffic women. So you want to be aware that that is not done and over with. In fact, it's still definitely a problem worldwide. Dating apps, there's tons and tons of dating apps. It seems like every time you turn around, a new one is being developed. Even Facebook has a dating app, and many times on these apps, you know, at-risk youth or others can be promised acting jobs or lessons and then forced into some type of slavery or human trafficking. False advertisements with job and salary information where they're forced in enslaved in forced labor. And Yubo is a really popular one right now that a lot of people haven't heard of. And it's not a specific dating site. It's more of a social networking site where you can find people with common interests, but I know myself, I've actually worked a case where people met on Yubo from different states and went and met up with each other. So definitely a site that's growing in popularity that can be used for dating, and it was then later used, once they met on the site, they then decided to do some crimes together. So some sites to be aware of. Just some recommendations for keeping our youth safe online. We'll start with identifying some threats, but when you see a sudden change of behavior, maybe defiance before they've been having good grades, all of a sudden they're lashing out. Maybe they're on their phone or their tablet or their computer. Use has spiked. You want to monitor, remember on iOS or iPhone, there's actually a weekly screen time that you can look at their averages, and it will also indicate possible increases. You can also set on the phone features that after 40 minutes or 60 minutes on a certain social networking site, that's no longer allowed because the time's been allotted for that. Also, some indicators might be an at-risk youth running away on the weekends and ending up going, here in Florida, they may go to Miami and do house parties or VIP parties, and then they're back to school the next following Monday. Those are some things you want to be aware of. Definitely when you're recovering missing and endangered or missing runaways, asking some questions about human trafficking to make sure that they weren't a victim of that while they were missing and endangered. Sometimes we miss asking those questions. And then has the child received a new phone or a microphone or some kind of spyware, a credit card or phone card, sex toys, cameras, hotel cards, key cards, a new tattoo, sexy clothing, they just got their nails or hair massage done, or they're using someone's Netflix or Disney. Those are all some things that you just may want to kind of keep an eye on, or there may be no signs at all. Parents should definitely connect to your children's social media account. I don't care even if it's Roblox, and just make sure that you know who they're communicating with and get an idea. You don't have to actually know how to build the engine, but how to turn the car on. I think it's best practice for our children to make sure that you know at least what they're on and how it operates. Look for hand signs that may be consistent with gang activity. And then, as John was telling us earlier, if they're wearing all one color for a long period of time, that could indicate some concern. And especially when they're posting those same colors on social media. Review their online habits using those parent tracking systems, which I kind of went over with you. And then review their privacy settings on gaming platforms. Just because they're playing some of these really popular games online doesn't mean that they need to have the volume turned on. And there are ways on a lot of these games that the kids are playing, such as Fortnite, where you can turn off hearing what all these other people are saying, so they don't have to hear the gang recruitment or what other people online are saying that may be inappropriate for them. Be aware of bruising, indicating a beat-in. Be aware of, like I said before, their weekend trips. Check their mobile phone for photos that they may be taken. Remember, especially, and I know for iOS, there's a hidden section within albums. They may be hiding some of their photos there, so you can check there. And look for any suspicious drawings or posts that could indicate gang involvement. Be aware of friends with thousands of followers. So if you have a child at risk youth that has thousands of users or friends, that could be a concern. Not always, but definitely something to keep in mind. And that concludes my portion.
Sean, if you're speaking right now, you may be on mute.
Thank you, Will. I had a little technical difficulty there for a second. So let me go. So with all of that information, now you're wondering what you can do, how you can help youth in your community. through these issues, and we want to give some resources and some tools that you can actually use. The first of those resources is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which is the authority in helping law enforcement with missing children cases and also child exploitation. Here's a screen from their tip line that you can report any kind of child exploitation to them, and they are relentless in their follow-up and make sure that the right people get that information and can do the right thing with it. Also from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children is the NetSmarts program. And if you will just type, there's a link here, but if you just go to missingkids.org or type in your web browser NetSmarts, it's going to take you to their NetSmarts resources. I'm going to tell you there's information here for every single person that is online here, whether you're a parent, a law enforcement officer, just somebody from the community that's interested, educators. There are PowerPoint presentations, there are videos, there's interactive, actually they have a website for young kids, an interactive website. There's tip sheets for parents, for kids. This is an incredible resource if you want to do an online safety program for kids or an awareness program in your community. I would say go to NetSmarts. Everything that you need is there, and it's a great resource. A similar resource is Connect Safely, and they have just a wealth of information there also. They have videos. They actually have family contracts that families can use to develop a contract between the parents and the kids about how social media is going to be used, things like what's going to be reported to parents when they see it. They have teacher guides, and they have guides for parents on almost all of the platforms, even the newer platforms that are appearing almost weekly, so parents can get a real succinct sort of overview of what the platform's about and how it's used. So some other resources are the platforms themselves. You know, we spent a lot of time talking today about the bad things that are happening on all these platforms. But the reality is that sites like Facebook and Instagram are used by people that are not gang members every day, millions and millions of people, and these gang members are actually misusing these platforms. So these platforms realize that. They understand that there's some danger when their platforms are used improperly. So most of them have done a lot of work to create a safety center or a privacy and safety center. If you'll go to facebook.com/safety, there's all kinds of resources there for parents or for educators that guide you on how to use that resource safely. So I wanted to point out that these platforms are working proactively to try to keep their users safe. So also, same thing with the service providers. So everybody that connects to the internet is connecting through a service provider. Some of the more common ones here, at least in our area, Sprint, AT&T, Comcast, Verizon, and there's hundreds of others across the country. These are just examples. For instance, Verizon has a Smart Family program that you can go there and actually they'll make you aware of the tools and the settings that you can have on your device and on children's devices so that you can keep them safe online. That's a great resource, especially for parents. So we talked about the relationship between gangs, social media, and human trafficking. And I'm telling you that is an emerging concern that the National Gang Center has gotten involved in just even recently. And I'll tell you about some of those resources. But if you're having an issue where you suspect human trafficking is an issue, especially for law enforcement, OJJDP maintains this resource listing for all the programs that they have regarding human trafficking. So that is another great resource, especially for law enforcement officers. Another tremendous resource is the National Human Trafficking Hotline. They have the 800 number, 888. You can text, live chat for anybody that is a victim of human trafficking or if you suspect that somebody is a victim of human trafficking. Regardless of age, you can call that hotline. You can not only report it, but you can also get assistance there. They have people that can help get others out of that situation. It's also a great site for data and information and research about human trafficking if you're working on those types of educational activities. Finally, the National Gang Center, which is our website that we maintain to help all of you that are working in communities that are impacted by gangs. There are tools here for law enforcement. There's tools here for parents, educators, researchers, anybody that has an interest in helping their community deal with issues with gangs. So I encourage everybody online to go to the National Gang Center website and just dig around. There is a wealth of information, including a library of publications, research that has been done, and you'll see here on the right side of the screen here, that's actually a video that we have about why youth join gangs, which is extremely useful. I'll talk about that more in just a second. There is a great guide for parents. It's called The Parent's Guide to Gangs from the National Gang Center. That resource is actually in the handout posting. So I thank NTAC's group for putting that there. And you can also get it online at our website. It is a great resource, not only for parents, that educates them on the issues with gangs and kids, but also for law enforcement officers, social workers, teachers, anybody that needs to have a discussion with a parent about the possibility of their child being involved in a gang. This is a great resource, completely free. Just go online and download it. With the discussion about human trafficking and the relationship with gangs, a couple of months ago, we did a similar webinar to this, specifically on gangs and human trafficking. So I'd invite anybody that has an interest in that and wants to learn a little bit more is to go to our website. Just search for the Gangs and Human Trafficking webinar. You'll be taken to our library where there's a link to the recording that NTAC did on that issue. So finally, here's our contact information for the National Gang Center, and it's really easy to find. In any browser, if you type in National Gang Center, it'll be the first listing that comes up in the hit list. You can go there. There's contact us information there. The general email is information@nationalgangcenter.gov. I also encourage you to follow us at our Twitter account for information. But again, a lot of resources there, and we are absolutely here to help. So now that takes us to our question and answer portion of the show, and I've got a couple things that I want to do just to sort of. We've seen some questions coming in through the chat. We received some questions sort of in advance as you were registering, so we're not going to get to the hundreds and hundreds of questions that we had. But we're going to try to get to the ones that we think are maybe most helpful. And if there's something that we don't answer for you that you really need an answer for, use that contact with the National Gang Center, and we'll do everything that we can to help you. So the first question I'm sort of going to answer myself because it involves law enforcement officers. So for the law enforcement officers that are online with us today or are listening in the future to the recording, a question is, how can law enforcement officers get more detailed information about the tools that are available for social media investigations? As Sergeant Mundell said during her presentation, is that all the tools that we're sharing right now are open source tools. Okay, they're available to the public. They're available to anyone. Obviously, we can't get into a lot of detail about the tactical or the covert nature of social media investigations, but we have help for you. If you are a law enforcement officer or law enforcement official, probation officer that needs to do these types of investigations, if you will just send us an email from your department's email address to information@nationalgangcenter.gov, we will point you to those resources that you need, and we're happy to help you with that. So, Sergeant Mundell, are you on with me now?
Yes.
Awesome. We have got a great question that I think is really relevant at this point. So have you seen, or is there a danger of more exposure or risk to children in this COVID-19 environment when we're online more and more? What would your response be to that?
Well, I can just say that I've been following this since obviously March, and there have been so many pieces of work being posted across the country and then notified to law enforcement that they have seen an increase in human trafficking and indicators of human trafficking since COVID-19 has occurred. And I haven't seen it in my personal community, an increase, but it's definitely something that's been talked about across the country by law enforcement officials. Just because you have more people at home with less things to do and a lot more potential for at-risk youth, for sure.
Okay,
So
so next question for you, Heather. A lot of questions about how gangs use emojis and other symbols in social media to communicate. How does somebody that's monitoring this activity know what these emojis mean?
Well, it's really hard to tell on some ways and easier on others. We've known that the Crips may use the two thumbs up, one forward, one backwards, to make their symbol. We've also had the gas symbol where, they may be looking for some type of narcotics. For bank runs, many times they may use a credit card with a man running and, a money bag and stuff like that to indicate they want one of their members to go run a bank run. And there was a New York Post I think it was New York Post did an op-ed on it last year, how gang members were possibly using emojis. But it depends on the different gangs and how they use them. So one emoji may mean something completely different to another group, and that's where, kind of getting in there and asking those questions and maybe getting more intel for your specific group would be helpful with those emojis. There's also been a couple questions, if I may, that people have asked about the people viewing the Facebook live stream video when the gang rape occurred several years ago and whether or not they were prosecuted. John, do you want me to go into that?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, please.
Okay. I'm not exactly sure if those specifically 40 viewers were charged at that time, as that was another agency's case. However, in my experience with prosecuting people that had viewed a crime online and not reported it, I have not seen a lot of success with that. Because then you would potentially have to charge 40 people from across different states with viewing something and not reporting a crime, and not really being aware to put them behind the computer or the phone. Were they really watching at the time, or did they just have it playing in the background? And then who actually had their phone at the time when it was being viewed would have to probably be proved, and that would sort of be maybe a tough case for prosecutors, just to throw that out there. Also, several of y'all have been so helpful and wrote some different things about Snapchat you can do, like the heart doesn't always mean it's the number one person you're talking to. And of course, in general, that is the case. But there are cases where you can kind of fudge things around to throw people off. But in general, most of the time, that's what these emojis mean on Snapchat. But again, there's always room for error. Even on Instagram, we spoke about how you can be, anytime you look at a story, it will show your name. But there's ways that you can pause the video, hit pause, and then go back, and then you saw it, but you didn't see all of it, so it may not post about it. So keep in mind, these are general. I'm not going to get into intel type things or investigative uses that law enforcement may use all the time to do some of these things. If they do, for investigative purposes, and not only them, it's on the internet how you can view stories and not watch it all the way. But common practice is people will view a video and you can kind of see the different users that are out there. You also mentioned Cash App and Amazon gift cards. You're right, those are really used a lot, especially within human trafficking as payment systems, and those are very popular as well. I think, unless you have other questions for me, those were the ones I saw right off.
Yeah, we've got lots of questions here. Let me give you a break here, and I'll take a couple of them. So some people have asked about criminal offenses for gang recruiting online, and are these actually prosecuted? So that's actually going to be probably a state violation, a state statute violation. Most states now have a statute or a law that prohibits any kind of recruiting, whether it's online or not. And there's various penalties ranging from misdemeanors to felonies. It depends on the age of the child that's being recruited or whether there was violence involved and those types of things. But yes, there are absolutely jurisdictions that are prosecuting people for recruiting gang members, whether it's online or not. So there's several examples of that. I wanted to address a sort of a bigger question here. A few people have asked what triggers young people to become a gang member, or which kids are at highest risk of joining a gang. So I mentioned in the resources that the National Gang Center has a great video on our website, Why Youth Join Gangs. And I really recommend that anybody that's working with youth in communities that are impacted by gangs watch this video. It goes into great depth about the factors that can indicate risk of gang involvement and all the science behind that. But the short answer is that there are risk factors within several domains of a child's life that tend to push or pull youth into gang affiliation. For example, in the individual domain, and that's the individual, the youth, there are risk factors like problem behaviors or antisocial beliefs that could be indicators of gang affiliation. In the family domain, there's risk factors like poverty and abuse. In the school domain, one of the big risk factors is academic failure, including truancy and that type of stuff. And then within the peer group, which some of us think is maybe the most dominant domain, there are risk factors like weak social ties or having friends that are already gang affiliated. And then there's also the community domain with risk factors like the presence of crime, disorder, and obviously gangs. So children that are exposed to more of these risk factors and less of the opposite of that, which would be protective factors, are more likely to join gangs in general. Although there is no one single indicator, and not each of those indicators applies in every case, because we are human beings with our own personalities and our own circumstances. So maybe to simplify that even more, I would say that youth are growing up in neighborhoods that are deeply impacted by gangs, that don't have strong, healthy peer, family, and educational support systems, are at the highest risk of gang affiliation. Remember that these youth are trying to fill basic human needs in their lives, and often it's issues of safety and security. And the gangs will promise to fill this role. Of course, we all know they don't live up to that promise. So that'd be sort of the short answer. But again, I would direct everybody to that video. It's an awesome resource, and most cases it'll be informational, and a lot of cases it'll be transformational. It'll change the way you design programs that are intended to help kids through these issues. So Heather, back to you for a couple questions. If a teacher, parent, or social worker sees signs of gang membership, who do they turn to? Who do they speak to? What's the best resource for them at a local level?
Definitely, there's school resource is one. Sometimes there's other units within law enforcement that are out there just to help. Like my agency has a grip unit, so they actually work with getting to the kid before they even, just at the beginning thought of being a gang member. They get there and try to intervene and get them involved in programs. Social workers definitely, and there's a lot of different programs out there with some of the material that y'all submitted, and parents too, letting the parents know what's going on. There's some parents that may be more involved than others, but it's a lot of grandparents we see, they don't know about all these features and tools online, so they don't know what to look for. So just kind of like pointing that information out to some of their guardians would also be helpful.
Right. And we like to refer people to their local law enforcement, the gang units, especially the school resource officers. It's a great resource if you have access to that in your community. Heather, just real quickly, we got less than a minute here. People are asking, is there a way to obtain the actual locations of posts with a real user's name?
Like, say that one again, I'm sorry.
So is there a way to obtain the location where the post came from or the user's real name?
There are ways law enforcement can use for subpoena if we have probable cause or if we have exigent circumstances. So there have been cases where there's been a missing juvenile that we've believed that they were maybe a threat to themselves or others. And so we got with Snapchat or even Kik or whatever account, and we requested an exigent subpoena because we believe them to be exploited or in harm's way. And they did provide us with information once we sent them the request for their location. And for a username, there's some tools that you can use, but many times some people's cell phone number is linked to their username. So sometimes when you download the app, and if you have that phone number in your contact, it may ask you if you would like to link the two, and sometimes does provide a username, not a location in that manner. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Heather, for your help here, especially over your expertise. We appreciate that. We're going to close it up. I'm going to hand it back to Will so he can take us through the conclusion. Thank you all.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Sean and Heather, and thank you to our audience for joining us for today's webinar. We're going to wrap up just with a couple of quick housekeeping items to go over. Please note that if you would like to get in contact with OJJDP's INTAC, you may do so by going through the link on this slide, or you can sign up for our TTA listserv. Also, be sure to like us on Facebook at OJJDP TTA. If you'd like to get in contact with OJJDP, you may do so by making a phone call at the number to the help desk located here, or you can send an email to ojjdptta@usdoj.gov. Also, you can sign up for the OJJDP JUJUF listserv to get the latest and greatest about upcoming events. Do you have a training or technical assistance need? Well, if so, you can submit a request for help via the OJJDP TTA 360 platform. The link to access that platform is located here. Please note, as we stated before and also in our chat, that this webinar is being recorded and will be available on INTAC's YouTube page, where you can access the transcript or even supporting documents and materials by contacting the OJJDP TTA Help Desk. Please take a moment to review this disclaimer. Uh-oh. Let me go back, sorry. And then also, as a reminder, please note that we do have a survey for you all to complete that will provide valuable feedback around today's presentation. Please join us for these upcoming webinar events. We have two coming up, several coming up in July, which including one with our colleagues at Innocent Justice Foundation and another with the National District Attorneys Association. And then we have additional Innocent Justice Foundation webinars coming up in July as well. These links are indeed live, so you may click on them to register, or you can click the Learn More button to learn more. And then we have, again, additional webinars coming up for July with our colleagues with the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys. And before we wrap up, I do want to switch back over to a quick poll question for those remaining. If you could, please provide the following information. How do you plan to apply the information from this webinar in your work. Notice that there are multiple options that you have here where you can go in and you can actually select. So feel free to select multiple options here, but please let us know, how do you plan to apply the information from this webinar in your work? And I'll leave this up for just a couple of more seconds for folks. Nonetheless, thank you all very much for attending today's webinar. Have a great afternoon. Goodbye.
Host has left the meeting, so at this time, the meeting will come to an end. Thank you and goodbye.